Today on Storytellers Behind the Scenes, I am delighted to introduce you to Michelle Angela Ortiz. She is an incredible artist and visual storyteller. She not only uses her artwork and her painting to share the stories of community and situations that we may never hear about, but she relates to these people that she speaks about in a way that really amplifies their stories. Her artwork uses the combination and integration of her work with film to share the stories of the voiceless. I am so inspired by her work and her talent and eager to have you meet her as well. So sit back, grab a drink, and let's get right to it. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here. I am just in awe of everything that you've been able to accomplish, your awards, your artwork, your filmmaking. It's incredible. And I'm just so excited to have you here. Tell me what you're working on right now, because you do a lot of different things, don't you?
Yes. Well, thanks. I just also want to say thank you for inviting me and just, sharing a little bit about my work as well. It's always kind of like a good moment just to kind of like reflect and also share the behind the scenes work, which most people don't get to see or hear about.
Right. They think our world is very glamorous, don't they?
Yeah. Or it's like, oh, this just happened by just magic, and it was effortless, and it takes a lot of work and energy, so and commitment and dedication and faith in the work that you do, so that we all do. So right now I'm working on a project that's very dear to my heart, that's called the Our Market Project. I started this project in 2019, kind of the idea and concept around it. This was shortly after I received my Pew Fellowship, and I used some of that money to start having conversations with the people that reside along the 9th Street Market, or what's known as the Italian Market in South Philadelphia, which is my home and continues to be my home for 40 plus years. This is a place where my parents immigrated to. My mother specifically is the person that's lived in this neighborhood the longest. She arrived when she was 17 years old as a very young immigrant from Colombia, the Caribbean coast of Colombia, which is very important to share because we have our own type of food, or the dialect and the way we speak. The music is very different in different parts of Colombia. So she immigrated to this neighborhood and started working in the market in 1981, and worked in the market for 25 years with one of the known Italian families, which are the Giordanos. And during her time there, she connected with not just families, but also so many other workers similar to her as an immigrant coming into this country, and specifically along the market. And so the Our Market Project is really around honoring her and the sacrifices and the triumphs and the relationships she's been able to cultivate. In 2019, I was just finishing the second phase of my Familias Separadas project, which is around stories of detention, deportation, and how it's affected families in the U.S. And I felt that the Our Market Project, I really wanted to invest in my community, create this multi-year project that required that time and still requires that time and energy, because it's a love letter to my community and investment to my community. And so since then, and through the pandemic, it's been growing and developing to, from revitalizing produce stands, which we've actually this Sunday will be documenting the second installation of artwork that will be installed in John Gargano's stands. He is a descendant of Italian immigrants, and his grandfather came to specifically in the market and worked there in the late 1800s. And he still continuing the family tradition. And we've revitalized other vendor stands like Lilia and Joel, who are originally from Puebla, Mexico, who come from land workers. They worked in the land too, and in their home countries. And Mr. B and his wife Hoa Tran, who arrived to the market in 1985 and are still one of the few Southeast Asian produce vendors among the market. So that there's many components to our market. There's the revitalization of the stands. We've utilized public artwork as a way to enhance and have function in the market. So the stands are a work of art and they're functional. I've installed a number of light boxes on the south side of the market, and they're also functional, but they represent the different stories of the business owners, specifically Mexican business owners, and centering their stories on light and hope and love versus just what they contribute in terms of labor and our economic growth to this country, right? And so just figuring out, I think at the core, I consider myself as a visual storyteller. So in any shape or form that this manifests, whether it is through writing or painting or creating these public artworks or film, it is figuring out a way to represent a different perspective, and also open a space or create a platform for these stories to be heard and seen.
What I love about what you're saying too is, and I didn't even realize this, and I've spent, a fair amount of time at the Italian market, not so much, since the pandemic, but everyone who hears, oh, the Italian market, you figure everything is Italian,
Yes. Well, I mean, I think
every single vendor. But what I love is what you're saying is it's a multicultural market that really has introduced so many different cultures and different types of food, which is incredible in and of itself. So I love the fact that you're going to share that story. And it's certainly a place that I know a lot of people who come to visit Philadelphia, they like to go to the Italian market, or they want to go to Chinatown. And so we have a melting pot in the city of Philadelphia. So what better way to tell that story? And so this weekend, you're doing an installation and then you're filming it as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So we are actually installing. So there's artwork that goes with each one of the produce stands. So each one of the produce vendors are receiving sustainable, custom-made, welded steel, powder-coated tables that are going to last, another 60, 70 years if possible or more. And the artwork is a reflection of their own story. So what's great is that the phrases that come out from the artwork actually are generated from the interviews that I do with each one of the vendors. So there are short and longer interviews that I've done with each one of the produce vendors. And then from there, some of their words, like, so John's phrase is, if you get knocked down, get up and keep fighting, right? Which is like such a, like, not even, it's such a, like,
such a gritty Philly kind of
exactly.
thing, right?
And I feel so like, I mean, those are the moments where, like, I honestly, like, I identify as a child of immigrants and, being in this, but like, it's so true to not just Philly, but 9th Street, like folks who live, folks, outsiders are like, oh, well, Italian market, or there's a lot of Mexican vendors on the south side. So there's like this whole, like, okay, this is the Mexican market. But honestly, anyone who lives and was born and raised and is in the market, we've all referred it to as 9th Street. So it's always been a market of immigrants. And I think that's really important to even think about in terms of Philadelphia history. I believe that, and what's seen within the cultivation of the market has been very much, giving credit to the Italian families that have built this foundation that, and for me, that's the value that I think some of the families, whether they're have been there or are still there, right? That have built a foundation for so many other immigrants to come, right? And be able to, provide a better life for their families. And so that in itself is so beautiful and valuable, and part of the story that needs to be told, that then opens the space where we are still acknowledging and giving value to the other stories of people coming from different places. Even my own, as I mentioned, I'm neither Italian or Mexican. I'm Colombian and Puerto Rican. I was born and raised in this neighborhood. And so my own experience and seeing the market, and it's definitely something that is very distinct and beautiful in our, and a beautiful treasure that we have in our city.
How long does it take you? So you pre-interview, or you interview all these folks, and then you kind of talk to them about what they would like to see their art work to look like, and then you come up with it. Do you share with them your preliminary drawings, get them to weigh in? How does that all work for you?
All of the above was what you just said. And really what it comes down to is, and with the folks in my community. And so this is the other thing, right? I think that there's this assumption that, well, you're from the community, you're born and raised there, people know who you are, that must be easy. It's easy to just get people to say yes. And the reality is that no, it's actually, I have to still cultivate that trust in that building. So it really all starts with a conversation first. It is about showing, hey, I have this idea. I think it could help and benefit you in this way. Would you be interested? We can talk more about what this entails. And then it's continuing that conversation. It is about creating visual mock-ups and speaking to, what that stand could be. But before we even get to those mock-ups, it's how can this solve a problem for you, right?
Okay.
How can this be something that is a solution or support you? Because in the end, and I think that that's also the challenge for artists. And, I think back to like my training in undergrad and in my master's program. And it's like the artist is the one that has the vision. The artist is the one who's dictating like how this is going to be, how this is going to look. But then my community background, what I saw and experienced, like, because I didn't grow up going to museums and galleries, is more of art is what we create. And if it's something that can be, especially in the 9th Street market, beneficial to the people and to the community, then it's much more than being beautiful. It actually has a meaning and a purpose and a function, right?
I love that. So it's serving so many purposes, and you're giving back to your community so much. So it's not that you're just beautifying it. You're giving them something functional that's going to last them, as you said, for many, many more years, that they can actually utilize in their businesses, which is incredible.
But in terms of the design, for example, we start with conversations with the produce vendors, the length and the distance of their stands, obviously under the city requirements that they need to have, but the colors, the color schemes, how they envision their stand, all of that comes from those conversations. And then I begin to do the mock-up. From that mock-up, then I'm sharing those designs with them. They're saying yay or nay. And
are you filming all this stuff too, Michelle? Like in your pre-interviews and all of that stuff?
No, so that's the hardship of doing this work, right? So where we are now is I received a grant from the Leeway Foundation, which is the media residency grant, and part of that work is to create a team. Which I have. There's another local videographer. His name's Kevin Nguyen. He's a child of Vietnamese immigrants, born and raised actually on the same block I was raised on, and he's worked in the market. So he is part of my media team. He's been documenting, but a lot of this stuff behind the scenes we haven't been able to capture because I can't be behind the camera and speaking to the vendors at the same time. So we're trying to see if we could capture some of that stuff afterwards, right? But it's been very difficult in trying to do both things. But what I wanted to say is that when we think about the designs, some really beautiful things came out. So for example, Mr. B's favorite color is blue. So we we focused on the color blue, but he also spoke about his journey of going from one refugee camp to another and crossing the ocean. And so we did all of these beautiful water patterns in his design. But what we've been able to do is do these short interviews, have folks like really respond to what it is that we're doing together and building together. And through that process, begin to kind of share, well, what have been the challenges in the market? What is the future of the market? How do you see some of those challenges or solutions to those challenges? And that might not make it to the final interview, but that's information that we're able to collect as we're kind of building together. And I think, especially in spaces where communities like artists are not seen or valued as, critical members of society, right? In terms of how we visualize things, how we tell the story. What I find is that through this process and the trust building if someone feels heard and they're sharing their story, then it opens the door to say, hey, as a matter of fact, I was trying to find a solution to this. Do you know someone who can offer resources, information? And so that's kind of like the extra work that happens, but it's also comes out of that trust building and that commitment to communities. Now, I can say this is my community, right? So being my community, it is like an extra effort that I'm placing in
Of
this
course.
work and in this project. But also it just is definitely, like I said, a labor of love and commitment when I'm doing the work, whether it's through film or through these public art installations or just connecting with people and delivering, right? And saying, okay, yes, we did this, we accomplished this. Then what it's creating is this sense of like hope, right? Like, oh yes, this happened, or I connect with this story. I feel like so many people need to know about not just the stories of 9th Street outside of us, but we also need to hear each other's stories. We all have different points of revival. We all have very similar struggles. And I think it's just a beautiful reminder that even though we might come from different places and have these different experiences, there are some really beautiful common threads that
I have that conversation a lot, Michelle. I agree with you 100%. People don't, we all have so many similarities. We go through similar struggles. Sure, there are differences. People don't look deeply into the struggles that individual has had if they've grown up in poverty, or as a woman, could have been molested, or, those stories are common throughout society and around the world, and that's, I think, really the link that binds us all together. And what you're doing is so beautiful, because you're going to share these differences in these stories, but then also share the common thread, that we really are one people, and that we really all, I believe this I believe this in my heart, is that we're all struggling and moving toward the same goal, which is happiness, security, good health. We want to give our children a good education. We want to live in peace and harmony. And I know all of those things sound so cheesy, but I truly believe that. I've said this before, you can go to any continent, any country in the world and meet another mom or another dad or a grandmother or a kid, and we live parallel lives. We don't necessarily realize that. And so you're going to have, this is such a gift, not just to your community, but to everyone.
I mean, my thing is, and for anyone that does work in community, right? It's like you work with the yeses and the maybes, right? And you don't, you just, if you believe in what you're doing, you move forward and you find a way. We've had some like really great funders and partners. So with there's some components of the Art Market project that's in partnership with the Mural Arts program. We've got this great support, generous support from the William Penn Foundation. I just mentioned the Leeway Foundation in supporting our media residency. Our market is now an official Leave a Legacy grantee through Philadelphia 250, which is an organization and a committee of amazing folks that are coming together, and they're planning for the festivities of the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States in 2026. So our market will be a part of that building of Leave a Legacy, and the component that we'll be focusing on are the community-led tours. So a lot of we'll be doing in-person tours, but we'll also be relying a lot on these stories, these video stories that we're collecting, to
maybe
then support.
maybe your film can be with the Philadelphia, Visitors Bureau or something like that, where it attracts people to the market as well.
Exactly. So we've we're exploring all of these different options, but for now, which has been great, is having the support and also even getting national funding. So some of the first conversations and sessions, I mentioned the Pew Fellowship, but the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture was actually one of the very first official grants that we received to really support these conversations and the work and the building of this work. And also the National Endowment for the Arts through the Mural Arts program, we've been able to do this work. So documentation and video and film and audio is collecting oral stories, all of those things. They're all being built in order to, again, influence how the story is being told. Like I mentioned, the artwork has some of the phrases from the interviews with the community members, to utilizing that for social media and being able to introduce some of these stories, but then also our growing digital archive. So we're trying to really collect a digital archive of all of these stories that, again, don't take away from what's already been collecting, but really builds and fills in the gaps of some of those stories. As I mentioned, we talked about there's Jewish vendors, Irish vendors that have been in the market, and families, Italian vendors, and the constant presence of African American laborers that those stories have not been shared. And so the way that I see all of this, as I mentioned, is like if I were to just kind of like see an arc of all these stories, it's acknowledging what's there and then thinking about, where are the gaps? Where are the holes? Where are the ways that we can even connect the struggles that a family was facing in 1901 is similar to the struggles that a family is facing in present day? And how do we address some of those issues? So it's a lot of work, as you can hear.
Yes, it sounds like it.
But I feel that,
as they say, a labor of love.
A labor of love. That's right. And so we're lucky where we've been, I wouldn't say lucky because we've worked hard for this, but really blessed with having the support of the William Penn Foundation that will take certain components of the project through 2024. I'll just share this with you because I was just reviewing this with another member of my team. There's this archive project called the Baltimore Uprising Archive Project. And this was shared with me through a fellow, another art historian. Her name's Cherise Blackney, and she was part of our team. She had shared this resource of an open source where people are able to, for a particular event or during the Black Lives Matter protest and all the events that were happening, the general media was presenting one particular story. And what was lacking was all of the stories, accounts, memories from the community, and specifically the communities that were directly impacted by police violence, directly impacted by these injustices. And so this wonderful website that we're looking and inspired by, right, as a way of like, well, how could we create an open source document or system in the way this has been built, in which community members can actually just go in and either share their own oral histories, upload their videos, photos. And so it's not necessarily on the shoulders of the filmmaker or even the residency team that there's films that we're producing, but how can this live on, right? How can people still hear a story, be inspired, and share? And then how can this archive continue to grow? So I'm looking at resources like this one and others.
I love that you're doing that, because it's really, it informs people who don't have exposure, or may have grown up in a situation where they're being told their own stories. And so they're almost like brainwashed, in their mind. I see it all the time, with kids who are growing up. They come to the world with a previous set of beliefs based on what they've been exposed to. Doesn't make them a bad person. They may have biases that have been ingrained in them based on their upbringing.
Yeah.
So what you're sharing is going to be such an eye-opener to so many people.
What's really crucial and important in the work that I'm doing, whether it's this particular project or any project that I'm working on, is that I'm able to have people in my team who can actually understand and resonate with the community and the struggles and again the beautiful things about the community as well, the complexities, let's just say, of working in communities, but then also can really connect in a very authentic way, and bring that perspective in the work that we're doing. So
what else is cool? Food is such a cultural part of our lives. I mean, there's so many foodies out there now, right? So many TV shows based on food. But it's such an exploration of culture as well, because each of these vendors that you're highlighting and that you're working with bring a different cultural food with them, right? So you're sharing so much, and oh my gosh, the recipes that are gonna, we're gonna learn so much about, what's happening down there.
And my mom is so my skills rely on visual, doing public artworks and films and working with the community. And my mom's skills are the kitchen and food. And so I've been able to, taste the fruit of that labor that my mom has put in. But then there's also these really beautiful connections too around not just food, but produce and land workers and the value of that or where we should be putting that value, because the market, as much as there's so many stories, we feed our community, right? And so the beauty of that, presenting that. So
I'm sure during the pandemic, they were a crucial source during the pandemic, because
that's very
people
true.
weren't going out. It's an outdoor market, so more people were apt to go outside. And they probably had, like many people, challenges on supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, the supply chain issues were very apparent throughout the pandemic. And it did also still affect some of the vendors, well, whether they had brick and mortar businesses or outside stands, because they're all businesses. I think that the pandemic also shined a light on the inequalities or lack of resources. So what was coming out from the pandemic were, we're going to give folks loans instead of actually what people needed were grants, and also, there were some eateries that came up and other ways that people made it work. But, there were still challenges even to this day that still continue in the market. And for me in creating this project was when I talk about investment, right? It's also just shedding a light on what else is needed in this market. How can this project, how can sharing our stories be a catalyst to kind of bring awareness to some of the issues that are going on, or solutions that it's not just coming from me, but the people I'm interviewing, connecting with are bringing forth. And for me, in terms of my project, kind of switch that perspective and begin to talk about, really those profound stories that exist in the market and what makes us unique.
Tell me how you got into art, because you said earlier you grew up, you didn't grow up going to a museum. You didn't grow up, with art as sort of a focal point in your life. So when did you find that you were driven by art and the creative process?
Yeah, I can say that my earliest memory of me saying I'm going to be an artist was when I was 7 years old. And I remember just playing on one of the little street that I was born and raised in and still continue to live. And just someone had asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, I'm going to be an artist, not really even knowing what that really meant. And I think that, there's a couple of things that really influence me and just identifying and saying that I want to be an artist. One is that, I saw, like, for me, drawing, and because at that time, that's all I had available. So my dad worked in Center City, and he cleaned floors, and he would collect the scrap papers in the offices and would bring them back home to me. And those became my first sketchbooks, right? Those became like these loose pieces of paper that I would just draw. And my mom also, she worked at Giordano's during the daytime. And then in the evening, she would work another shift cleaning offices, also in one of the buildings in Center City. And so I didn't get to see my mom. There was only a few number of hours that I would see her before she would go off to her next job. And so I would leave her little drawings. This was before I was 7 years old. Like around 3 is when she says that she realized that I had talent, because she couldn't believe that I actually drew what I drew instead of tracing it. And so I used, the drawing as a way of just communicating, and, was like, copying, right? And
it was a form of expression for you, right?
Expression. And also, if I was ever frustrated or upset, I live in South Philly row home, so I would climb out of my brother's window, and if we had 7 people living in our small South Philly row home, and if I needed to escape everyone, I would just go into the kitchen rooftop through the window, because I was never really afraid of heights, which helps as being a muralist and doing murals that are 60 feet tall. So I've always found a little nook where I would just kind of doodle and draw, and had that interest. So it wasn't until I was really in high school where I had an art teacher who had recommended me to some programs, summer programs or Saturday programs. And that's where I was introduced to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, Moore College of Art and Design, Tyler, which is Temple University. And that's how I started being exposed. And I realized that I could paint and draw either at the same or better level or higher level than some other students that were coming from Central, and they had a huge art, department and place. Right. And so I think early on I saw what my capacity was, but I think
you have a true gift.
Thank you. And so when I think the reality of I can do this as a career, was really when I was doing these young artist workshops and doing this training and going to these, youth programs, that I saw, I can major in this. So that's how I was able to go to Moore College of Art and Design, where I eventually got my bachelor's in fine arts. But that was also thanks to the help of another organization called Aspira, which still exists and is an organization here in Philadelphia that supports specifically Latino communities that I didn't know how to do a college application. I didn't know what FAFSA was, any of those things. I was the first, my siblings and I were like the first group to like actually graduate high school, and then let alone to go into college was just a whole other step that we were not prepared for, like, and we were just trying to figure out what to do. And I really want to also give credit to my parents, because anyone who is listening to this and has immigrant parents knows that, you know, there's this inclination to say, you know what, you need to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, something good and stable, and you earn this money and you become financially stable, right? Because, and so when I was even considering being an art, you know, being a fine artist, and there was a lot of just, I had a lot of feelings, because I didn't want my parents to feel like their sacrifices were in vain. But then I also knew that this was my calling. And so, and to go into a field, to be the first, right? First college student to go into a field that is unknown, that no one else in your family has even done, is scary, right? And so there wasn't a point of reference. There was just, you need to figure it out. And during my time in undergrad, there was always this kind of perspective of like, well, you're creating art for it to be in a museum or gallery. And I just didn't really see myself there. I mean, I've exhibited in museums, like at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and in galleries, and I still do that to this day. But there was always this inclination to do work in community. And so that then led me to doing public artworks, murals, mosaics at the time. That then has evolved into video projections and this work that I'm doing in the market, to even, you know, working with immigrant rights organizers and finding ways to have the artwork or the display of the artwork be a way to gather and to create awareness and advocate around a specific social issue. So I followed that instinct. But I think it's not so much of like when I decided to be an artist, it's more of when did I realize that stories were important. And so for me, you know, I'm a granddaughter of the best storyteller you can even think about, which is my grandmother, Maria Dionisia Navarro, Mama Icha. We call her Mama Icha. And so my grandmother came around 1981. And I remember just being this small little girl and seeing this like large, beautiful brown woman that came to live with us. And she just told the best stories, and the way that she moved her hands and expressed. And she also loved soap operas, Spanish soap operas. So even the idea of like the drama and like, you know, she was very captivating in the way she told the story. And and I just remember being a little girl, and I didn't go to Colombia till I was 7 years old. But when I was small, I was, you know, little, I was like, my references to Colombia was based on these stories, right? Because I had never been. And so I would just start imagining and start, you know, figuring out like what colors, like what were the colors, what were the flowers that were there, you know. So when I visited Colombia, I was like, is this the place that Mama Icha talked about? Is this a place where you hit the guy over the head with like my mom, you know? And it's just like these beautiful things of like what I heard, and then trying to make that connection being in that space. And but you know, with my grandmother, it was also like, you know, folks might just perceive her story as being any other ordinary story, or you might not hear her story because we're focused on, you know, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and, you know, instead of her arrival to Philadelphia. So I learned also very early on that our stories not only can connect us to places that define or influence who we are, but also that our stories are beautiful and are meaningful, right? And that even the people who are telling the stories might not even recognize the value that their own stories have. And so when I connect with communities of all different, places, and I'm coming at it from that perspective, right? And I learned that through experiencing and hearing these stories of my grandmother. There's this actually really beautiful documentary that was made of her by a filmmaker. His name's Oscar Molina, which actually you should interview, because he was able to, he lived in Philadelphia for some time, is now back in Colombia. The film is called La Casa de Mama Icha, which is now accessible online. It was one of the documentaries presented by POV on PBS. So that's how it made its national debut. And then in Colombia, it actually received 5 nominations in the Academy of Film, which is the Oscars in Colombia.
That's incredible. And
it's
this is
huge.
a story about your grandmother?
It's my grandmother's, the story of my grandmother's return back to her home in Colombia, which there's a lot of stories, especially around immigration, of coming into the United States. And there's very little of, there are some stories, but the return back home, right? And this is as a 93-year-old woman at the time. And so it was really, it's one of those things where, as a storyteller, I knew that my friend, like I was very grateful that my friend was able to tell this story, because it's so personal to me. I lived through that experience. So that's also very difficult, right? As a filmmaker and a storyteller, that when you're so fully embedded in the story, it's hard to tell, right? Because also, how do you do it in a way
sometimes
that's
you
not
lose
biased?
perspective, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes you do. You lose a little bit of perspective because there's such an emotional attachment. But
Exactly.
that also brings a lot to the storytelling process as well, because there is that deeper level of commitment.
I think it is around, and I think about this in all the work that I do around ethics and responsibility, and how to do this work with dignity, right, to the person that you are sharing and opening up and sharing that story, and especially when they're topics that are very emotionally hard, right? I was dealing with letting my grandmother go, right, and then eventually her passing away in Colombia, but it was also a perspective of, like, the focus of the film, which I think is important, is her agency, her own agency as being an elder and saying, I want to go back, and how hard it was for us to let her go, but then all of the obstacles she faced in her home country, and family conflict, and like, that's my family, right? And it's not, there's some scenes that are really difficult to watch, to see my grandmother in pain, and then there's other really beautiful scenes of, like, the Magdalena River and my grandmother's home, and hearing her laugh, or how the sun hits her face, and those are things that, like, are so beautifully captured in this film. And I'm grateful for him in being able to capture that, and still, even now, how it's shown. And he's always connects with me and my mother and I, and just kind of, we have conversations about, complexities, or like challenges, and so I think that I, like I said, I'm grateful for, because sometimes our stories are told and there isn't that level of care and consideration given. I identify a lot with Oscar's work, because I did the same with when I was creating my documentary Las Madres de Berks, which is a 30-minute, it's not a feature film, it's a 30-minute film That represents the testimonials of 4 out of 14 mothers that were detained at the Berks County Residential Center, which is a family prison, was a family prison. I'm happy to say that as of January 31st, the prison has been closed. And that's been like
Excellent.
a 5-year fight of many
I didn't even know it was
organizers.
there, by the way. And I lived in Berks County
So for folks who
quite a
don't
while.
know, the Berks County Residential Center was actually the very first family prison. And when I say family, there's been adults, so mothers or fathers with their children, young children. There's been the youngest child that's been detained and incarcerated in this prison has been I believe 6 or 8 weeks old, right? And there was throughout this time, we're talking about there's organizers. It's called the Shutdown Berks Coalition, which are lawyers and immigrant rights organizers and advocates all throughout the state of Pennsylvania fighting to shut down this prison. And I came in to the project. Really, I learned about Berks in 2015 while I was doing the first phase of my Familias Separadas project. Familias Separadas project was a series of public art installations to share the stories of families that have been affected by detention deportation. It started in 2013 after I had witnessed neighbors of mine on my same block in South Philadelphia being targeted by ICE. And so I felt that it was necessary to talk about this coming from the northeastern part of the United States, because a lot of the conversations around the issues around immigration and detention and deportation were focusing on California, Texas, Arizona, these border towns. And the fact that we live in Philadelphia and that there's this family prison in our state of Pennsylvania, I felt that it was really important to tell this story and to also just kind of create awareness over the fact that this unjust immigration system does not only affect our borders, but it actually affects our entire nation and country, right? But for folks who don't know, the Berks County Residential Center was actually the first of the 3 family prisons. So there's 2 family prisons that still exist. These 2 family prisons continue to incarcerate families, but Berks was the first one. And so what's really important what I've learned from the organizers is that Berks basically was looked upon as the cookie cutter to replicate places like Berks County that can be very isolating in these small counties that probably don't receive many federal funding or support. And so by creating these prisons, right, they're seeing it as, oh, we're able to receive these federal funds and give employment to our people in our county, but at what cost? At the cost of abusing and incarcerating and traumatizing these families who are seeking asylum. And so in 2017, I started visiting the families at Berks. We would drive from Philadelphia to go to Berks County. I would visit the families when it was we were able to enter, because at some point they stopped visitors from coming, which is another tactic to silence the families inside.
That's horrible.
The ACLU
they completely isolated them.
Exactly. So there was a number of documents. So if you go to lasmadresdeberks.com, which is a website that I created for the short film, there's also a number of resources. The lasmadresdeberks.com showcases some of those documents that list numerous human rights abuses that happened in this facility. And so during my visits, I wasn't able to bring my phone. I couldn't record anything. I couldn't. It was all just based on conversations. I could draw and paint with the families and have kind of at least that outlet. And then from that, moment, we just continued to have conversations. Out of that, I did a number of public art installations. But once the families were released, and specifically these four mothers, three were released and had the right to continue to fight for their asylum in the United States. And one of them, she was deported back to El Salvador after being in this facility for 2 years, where her son at the time, who was 6 years old, was had 2 suicide attempts. And so when we think about these really, again, intense and it's not even heartbreaking. It for me, it sparks a lot of just
anger,
right? That this is happening, that this is happening in our state. And then just
it shouldn't be happening, period.
Exactly.
It's still happening today.
It's still happening today. So there's always this, the advocates and I give it to the immigrant rights organizers and organizations, because they're dealing with this 24/7. And the way that I saw my role, and when I connected with the Shut Down Burke's Coalition and the organizers, was really, how can my work as an artist be useful and advocating? So the same approach as I had with the produce vendors, right? In terms of how could this project be help or resolve an issue or help advocate? That's the same perspective that I'm thinking that I did with my Familias Separadas project. And even again, like, so when I'm thinking about a topic like this, right, that is a very, it is around social justice. A lot of it is learning and listening. And also it's about working with the people who are doing the work. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's really connecting with the people. And most importantly for me is connecting with the people who are directly impacted by this issue. And so when I talked about ethics and responsibility earlier, right, is I'm coming at this work in a position of privilege, right? I am a US citizen. I can enter and exit the prison as however I want, right? I can go back
freely
and be freely. And it's a right that they should have as well, right? And I can be back home and be with my son and dictate how he's going to be disciplined, what school he's going to go to, what time he's going to eat, if he could sleep in the same bed as I do, or I want to give him a snack. I have that freedom to parent my child that the mothers did not have, right? And so again, it's really important. It was really important as I was developing even this idea of the documentary. And it was only possible after the mothers left the center, because I couldn't get in and build on that. But what I did do was build that relationship and trust with them, that in the moment that they left, and they all did not stay in Pennsylvania. So when I met to interview them, I received a grant, the Artist as Activist grant, through the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation. And it was through that grant that I was able to go and connect with the mothers, and also be able to kind of build these stories.
And such powerful stories. I mean,
yes. And
the pain that these families must carry with them.
And
it is heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. And I think that for me, the film itself was, so the film centers, as it should, the mother's stories. And what are kind of like the stems from those stories are the public art installations that I did in the Capitol in Harrisburg, and also the information that the Shut Down Burke's Coalition was able to share in terms of the situation. What are we looking at? How can we understand what is going on? And what is the action that we can take? And, but I think with the stories of the mothers, they, again, had the complete freedom to share what they wanted to share. I didn't go into their cases or legally, because they were still fighting for their asylum. But then also, it was about, even with the first edits, they saw their edits. They knew how their story was going to be told, and getting the green light from them to move forward. And again, that goes all into the responsibility part where it is, yeah, I have a vision as an artist and as a filmmaker. But it's as equally as important that whomever it is that I'm telling the story of feels that they are best represented in this work. And that takes time. And then sometimes there are artists who just don't see it that way, and that's fine as well. It's just a different way of working. But what I want to share was that when I also wanted to make sure that as the mothers were sharing their stories, whether it was during my visits or after in doing the interviews, that we always left at a moment of hope. So I would ask them questions like, what gives them hope in moments of darkness? What is the future that they have for themselves and for their children? And basically thinking about even like, who is the most powerful or strong person that you know, that you're holding on to, that you learned from to be strong, right?
Very poignant questions for them.
And they're incredibly important because it's not focused on when did you arrive, like the questions that you would have for a court case, the questions that you would have for an immigrant rights campaign, to demonstrate how they've been victims of the system is really important as well, because it helps their cases. But there's no room to talk about hope and love and resilience in the middle of all of that. And I felt that for me,
which really speaks to the reason they were coming here to begin with, right?
Exactly. So there's these really beautiful moments in the film where one of the mothers, she has a probation bracelet on her ankle, and she's in the room and she's singing the song that she would sing to her child in the detention center to calm him down because he was very anxious and nervous. And so you just hear her beautiful voice with her son, right? There's other moments where there was a mother who, in my visit, going to go visit her, it was the first time she went to the ocean and to the beach since being detained. And so just her playfulness and being in the water. And I mean, it's just these beautiful these beautiful moments that I've been able to witness, but then also have the really beautiful, the opportunity to demonstrate this and to show it out. So show it out to the world, right? I did a total of 23 to 25 screenings shortly after the film was finished, and organized all these screenings in all throughout the state of Pennsylvania. And I was very strategic in presenting these screenings to make sure that we always had a Shut Down Burkes Coalition representative. So then after the screening, right, everybody's feeling their emotions, whether it's anger, it's sadness, it's all of the above, right? To then say, okay, we're going to channel all these feelings, where I always ended the end of watching the film with a collective, like, deep breath. Like we would all do that together as an audience, and then give them updates on like what's happened, like, because things were like kind of evolving as we were going. And then I said, okay, well, now we have a representative from the Shut Down Burkes Coalition. These were all local organizers that can then utilize this moment and these feelings to then say, this is how you can take action, and an opportunity for the audience to ask, what can I do? But I think one thing, like I mentioned with the film, it became an opportunity where people could really see the mom or the child, right? And really identify that sometimes when we look at statistics and numbers, or even in the news, we're so separate from that. So it's that human connection. It's when you can resonate with the story that moves you so much, that not only just stirs these emotions, but then how can we then transition the viewer to say, okay, you're feeling this, and these are the ways that you can organize. And I learned that from those organizers, right? Of like, okay, this is kind of like A, B, C. These are all these different ways that you can sign a petition. You can make a phone call. You can do a letter party. You can go to Harrisburg and lobby and advocate when the governor is there to say that we need to shut this down. So there were all these kind of like different levels of engagement.
And they're also creating empathy, right? I mean, because again, it's about exposure. There's so much that goes on that we're not privy to. We're not told about. We won't necessarily, if you're in Philadelphia or even in Harrisburg, or like I lived in Moton, Pennsylvania, which is outside of Reading. I produced a video for Commonwealth Media Services, which is the state of Pennsylvania video production company, on migrant workers and their children going to school. I was never told that there was a facility where these families were being held.
Yes.
And that is, it's a detriment to society, because people cannot come together and make a difference and make a change if we're not given the information. It's like they're keeping it from us on purpose.
Yes. And I think that's, again, like I mentioned to you, is like acknowledging and understanding your own privilege, right? And then once you're aware of these things, you'll have your feelings, but what do you do about it? How are you taking action, right? And I think that for me, the artwork, the installations, the documentary, the screenings, those were my ways of using my skill sets to advocate and take action, but also following the lead of these organizers doing the work on the ground, and always checking in and keeping in mind the mothers, right? And saying, this is our next step. This is what we're going to do. Because another thing that the film allowed was that the mothers were so traumatized by what has happened to them. By doing the documentary, having them share their stories, they didn't have to be always on the microphone saying it over and over and over again, especially when they were at a point where they left the center and they were trying to build a new life for themselves and for their children. So the film, with their permission, right, and their blessing, became that microphone for them without having to retell that story again. And I see that a lot, especially when we think about stories and storytelling. We know the power of it, right? But we also, I also think that there's some situations in which stories are used, what's called like trauma porn, right? So it's like this idea of like, well, we need to tell a very sad story so that we can get funders to put money into this situation, or we need to tell a really sad story so that people can take action. And the reality is that works sometimes, but what is the toll of the person telling that story? Because after they get off that microphone, they just poured out all of their emotional energy and retelling a story that they're trying to heal from. And I think that that's another beautiful solution, or functional solution that films and video can make. And whatever, if it's audio stories, if it is video stories, if it is an actual like short films or long films, right, or feature films, is that it gives that person the opportunity to finally share and not have to relive that over and over and over and over again, right?
You're giving them the opportunity to share their voice, right?
Exactly.
So many times people they're put in a box, and they're only allowed to do so much. And you're giving them an opportunity to share their voice and their experience in a different way. And of course, they're traumatized. They're traumatized not just for themselves, but for their children. As a parent, as much as I do, any pain our kids have, we not only have our own pain, but we also experience their pain in a magnified way. At least the people that I know who are, parents.
No,
I can't even imagine, but I can only think, just from my own experiences with my children, the pain that they all went through, which is just, it's devastating.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said, the film and how I try to present the story, and even with the moms, was just having moments when, again, they're playing with their children, they're singing to their children. You can see and bear witness to their love, right? And their sacrifice. And
how amazing is it that they still have a light in them?
oh, absolutely.
Right?
And I think that
I mean, because that's
the
what
most
you
beautiful
did.
part.
You were shedding light on them, but they were allowed to share their own light, which is, something that's also important as a message for their own children. Is
Exactly.
we can be beaten down, but we're not going to stay down. Like that sounds to me like, sort of what they were working through during, the process of working with you in your documentary.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things that I was really mindful of is like when I went to go visit them at Berks, and they would tell and share their stories, share what's going on. And again, to those questions that I asked them, it was also because I was aware that they would have to go back to their room. And so I didn't want to leave them in a place of pain. I wanted them to be centered in a place of hope, right? And I think that so recently with the film, the center, the prison being closed, and I sent a message out to the families, and I was just like, "We did it! Congratulations!" And one of the moms, she reached out to me. She's like, "I just, being able to connect with you was just like such an important part of my life. Like, thank you for believing in me." And I said, "No, I said thank you, because just she and Carmen and all of the other mothers were just so inspiring to me as a mother, as a woman, as a child of immigrants, and just seeing their power and their love and their dedication to their children in the midst of a system that wants to dehumanize them, and how they're still surviving and thriving right through that, is just incredibly inspiring. And the 30-minute film doesn't do justice to all of that, but it just is really a beautiful moment of reminder of that.
Sounds to me like you need to do follow-up story and paint some portraits of the mothers with their children.
Well, we did. That was some of the public installations that we did, and there were portraits.
Oh, great.
So if you go to lasmadresdeberks.com, and there you'll be able to access the film. I just started streaming it also through Vimeo. There's a bilingual facilitator's guide that I created, because one of the things that I felt was really important before it made it out into the public was that we had a guide to focus on, like, it's for both people, right? People who want to introduce this into their community, into their educational settings. How do you talk about these issues if either you are understanding of the situation and are knowledgeable around immigration rights, and or not, you're totally disconnected, but you want to find ways to like really connect with your community or with your students. And so I created a facilitator's guide that accompanies the film, that also highlights some of the artwork created by the community members, and their letters to their children, and the letters that their children wrote to their mothers, and some really beautiful imagery there.
I love that.
There's enough information where people can go and because I think what's really important after seeing a film is, what are the questions that you ask after that? What are people's impressions, and how do you connect? And so that's one thing. So Las Madres de Berks came out of the second phase of my Familias Separadas project. Phase one started in Philadelphia, where there were a number of audio stories that I collected from 5 different families in the city of Philadelphia. And we did huge installations, like in front of the ICE building, in the courtyard of City Hall, these really, and Love Park, or the old Love Park, in 2015. And then
Good for you.
And then the second phase was this film, as well as, you know, the installations we did on the Capitol steps in Harrisburg.
What I love about what you're doing, Michelle, is that it's, I mean, all of it, but there are multi-layers of what you're doing. So your work takes you beyond just being a physical painter, illustrator, or an artist, or a filmmaker. You know, you're connecting the dots for people on so many levels that it's an educational process that you're taking us all through, which is really a beautiful thing, because also with art, you know, a lot of people, it's subjective, right? It's not objective. Art, my mother's an artist. I'm actually working on a documentary about her first cousin who was an artist. He's an aviation artist.
Awesome.
But art is very subjective. So you're giving people a window and opening their eyes to not just the physical artwork, but the meaning behind that, which is always, you know, when you do go into a museum, you're like, I wonder what, you know, that particular artist was thinking when they made that painting, right? And you're really sharing all those stories. So you really are just such an incredible storyteller on so many levels. It's brilliant. I love that.
Oh, thank you. There's this short film that I did of a activation that I did on the Grand Hall of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. That could be seen on my website. And that was called Arrival and Belonging. It was a commission piece that I did through the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And it highlights the stories of poor Philadelphians. One of them being my mother. And we talked about like our different points of revival. And so it's really great because there's these different perspectives, but it's a 10-minute film that highlights this moment that happened. We were trying to make it an event, but because of COVID, it was very difficult. But again, the magic of film is that we were still able to document that and then share that documentation. So there was 2 parts to the commission installation. This was part of an exhibition called New Grit Art in Philly Now. And it was the inaugural exhibition to the new contemporary art space in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And so I was one of 3 artists that were commissioned to do new work. And so I created a multi-screen, multimedia. So it was like screens and light boxes of the stories that you see as a still image. And then the videos begin to sync up and they connect with some of the static images in the actual light boxes. And they tell the story visually of the 4 community members. And then the second part, which we were trying to do as a public event, but due to COVID, we weren't able to. We still did in the Grand Stair Hall in the museum, showing and displaying some of the short videos that I did of each one of the community members actually going to their communities. So North Philadelphia and West Philly and South Philadelphia, and bringing the scenes of Philadelphia onto the Grand Stair Hall steps in the museum with the community member physically standing there as their story is being told. And that became one of what I refer to as or describe as an activation. So that was the activation that we did in the museum. But because we weren't able to, again, have people physically in that space, we filmed it. And then we were able to roll it out as a kind of like premiere video through the Philadelphia Art Museum. And one of the stories is in out of the 4 is my mother's story of her arrival to Philadelphia, because that's connected to why I'm here. And so just kind of making that connection. And what I really love about this installation, the commission piece, is that that's been something that I've been exploring in my own personal studio work, is figuring out ways to kind of connect the painted image, static image with video or projection and kind of having it move, but then also like the presence of the community while the story is being shown. So those are the things that I'm still working on and exploring while I'm working on all these other projects. But
Do you ever sleep?
No, I don't.
You are a rock star, my friend. You are a rock star.
Thank you. The second part is because the first installation that I did that was embedded in one of the walls in the museum, did not have any audio. And they were all based on illustrations, photographs, writing. The second part, you can hear the stories of the community members, see them. And then again, I was like, how do I bring where they're from into the space? And when I went to go see the Grand Stair Hall, and we're walking through, we got to see a little bit of what the spaces were where we were going to be exhibiting. I walked through the Grand Stair Hall, and I just imagined these stories echoing through this space, right? And the last story that's told is Fatu Gayflor. Fatu is a Liberian refugee, and she speaks to how she came again from Liberia, also had to live through different refugee camps to eventually come here. The still kind of instability around her status being a refugee in Philadelphia or in this country. And then the song, she sings this beautiful song at the end, which is a song that she's dedicated to her son that she lost during the war. It's just, her voice is so powerful and it fills up that space. And that's what I wanted, right, for this activation, that these stories fill up this space in the museum. And so that's the activation that we were able to document and share out.
That's a beautiful story. She's
like a superstar in Liberia. Like she was a child. She did sing, think of Stevie Wonder. Wow. Like child prodigy, sang, and like she is a well-known, like people know her. Like if I say Fatu Gayflor to a Liberian, they know who she is. And here we have her in Philadelphia.
That's amazing. What's next for you?
So, well, right now I'm focusing on the Art Market project, and the big bulk around the community stories, how they're going to be shared, building a team, and kind of like I mentioned, this digital archive. The stories that are going to be collected will be informing the community-led tours. So there's a number of tours that already happen in the 9th Street Market that are centered on food or specifically on Italian immigrant history. And I'm trying to add another component, but actually told by the people. So like combining some factual information as well as some of the present day stories. In addition to that, I'm working on 2 other mural projects that also are really centered around, one in particular is centered around immigrant and refugee communities. And this is through the Nationality Service Center, which is celebrating its 100 years of representing and providing legal and social service assistance to the communities, to immigrant and refugee communities. So again, I'm always surrounded by so many stories. And I think that it's just, again, figuring out what's the best way to share it out. But the inspiration continues. And that's the good thing, is that it never ends.
Well, I'm so happy to know that you continue to be inspired, because you are inspiring to our listeners, to the people who are looking at your artwork, and the communities that you're lifting their voices up. I mean, it's really a testament to the kind of person that you are, and I'm sure your parents are extremely proud of you.
Yes, I mean it's been great to do this work in the 9th Street Market because this is where my family, my parents are still in the neighborhood too. So they've been able to see these. I mean, I've done works like as a United States cultural envoy as well, and I've done work in other countries and other communities. But to do this in my own community, and to my mom is seeing all of the work, and not that she doesn't know about it, but it's like just bearing witness to it.
But hey, she can walk
great.
out her door and see your artwork. That's
Yes.
such a gift to a mom, to
Yeah.
your entire family and your community, your neighborhood. They saw you since you're a little girl, right?
I know.
And now
It's
you're
crazy.
conquering the world, which is amazing. It sounds to me like you're so connected with so many different organizations in the city, and that you're all looking to one another for inspiration as well, which is really a gift to everybody, because the fruits of your labor are visual, so that everyone gets to see them and experience them. And as a visual storyteller, you're really bringing so much to light.
Thank you. Well, I always enjoy having these conversations, and at least bringing a little bit of perspective in this work. I think as creatives, we're either so much in our bubble and in our work and in our project that that it's like it's good to just take a moment and just reflect, but also just to share that there still are challenges. But I think the driving force is the belief in the story is important to tell, and we need to share it. And for me too, is what impact will this have, right? Beyond the just telling the story. And so I just want to thank you for allowing me to tell my story in your space.
Well, we're so happy that you were able to join us, and we've spent quite a bit of time chatting, and
yes,
we'll bring you back on because there's so much more to talk about, and we can't wait to see how everything comes out, in the public, and we'll go down to the 9th Street Market, and you'll keep us informed about when you're going to have a, premiere of all these installations.
Absolutely. Yes.
Great. Great. Well, thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you.
Subscribe to our podcast to hear more.